Welcome to the Wanderers History Podcast and to continuation of the previous episode, which was entitled Selim II and the Divan before the Ottoman conquest of Cyprus, from Venetian Senator Diedo's account from Excerpta Cypria. In that first half, in the previous episode, we get insights into what Senator Diedo thought about the reasonings of Selim II at the mounted Divan, as well as the tensions within what we could call a war cabinet. Grand Vizier Mehmed Sokolu Pasha could not prevent the triggering of what would be a very costly conflict for the Venetians, but also for the Ottomans in Cyprus in 1570. However, it's quite telling that Diedo also offers reactions on part of Venetian officials, the Venetian Senate, which we see in the continuation of the text. From where we left off, the text goes on to say, quote, "Such were the preparations of the Turks for an attack on the island of Cyprus, and although other pretexts were alleged to excuse them, common rumor and certain unmistakable signs made their purpose clear, as Marcantonio Barbaro, ambassador to the Porte, was able to assure the Senate." There were, however, not a few senators who flattered themselves that Selim would not, at the beginning of his reign, plunge into a difficult war, which might stir up the Christian princes to injure his empire. They clung to their opinion so obstinately as to impress on the Senate that they should use the greatest caution in their warlike preparations so as not to divert the Turks from any other enterprise which they might have in view and not to draw down on the Republic an attack which was probably designed for the injury of others. But ideas of delay were soon exchanged for those of anxious haste, when the Senate was assured by fresh dispatches from their ambassador that the Turkish preparations were aimed solely at the island of Cyprus. Everyone was excited to rivalry in making suggestions and in carrying out the decisions of the Senate. It was resolved to fit out 100 light galleys. 11 commanders were chosen for the large galleys, and Francesco Duodo, a man already illustrious in naval warfare, was appointed to lead them with the title of captain. The command of the armed ships was entrusted to Pietro Trono, and to increase the strength of the whole fleet, it was decided to man a galleon of extraordinary size, whose bulk and strength should guard and stay of the smaller vessels. The command of this was given to Girolamo Contarini. The supreme command of the naval armaments was given to Girolamo Zane, procurator of St. Mark. He had been elected 2 years before, but had not set out and was considered legally entitled to remain in office. A naval force of considerable importance was thus in preparation, and no less energy was shown in reinforcing the garrison in the strongholds of Cyprus, Dalmatia, and others in the Levant. They were much strengthened in numbers, and their duties increased for the greater safety of the forts and the better discipline of the men. As, however, it was Cyprus rather than the other places which was threatened, the Senate hurried the departure of Eugenio Singlitico, a Cypriot noble who held the post of adjutant general of the land forces with 1,000 foot soldiers. Girolamo Martinengo, a condottiere, was sent there with 2,000 foreign infantry. And as the rumor of prompt pay drew from all parts mercenaries and captains of renown, all were accepted and transported with all speed to Cyprus. The armaments were thus complete, but dissensions prevailed in the Senate as to how they could best be employed. The writer inclines to the opinion that a squadron of some 40 galleys should have been dispatched at once to infuse courage in their friends, to anticipate the forays and to interrupt communications between the various provinces of the enemy. A league of the Christian princes would involve delays, provoke jealousies, and result in a display of force more magnificent than effective. The majority, however, held that it were unwise to scatter their ships and invite pursuit. Their fortresses were well found in men and munitions, and they could well wait until they had secured the adhesion and help of other Christian powers. Appeal was made to the Pope Pius V, who promised his aid, sanctioned the levy of 100,000 ducats from the Venetian dominions, and accepted the conduct of the League. At his instance, the King of Spain, Philip II, ordered his ships to assemble in Sicily and to await the Pope's directions. The King of Portugal, Sebastian I, pleaded the poverty of his kingdom, recently wasted by plague, and sent no ships. The German Emperor Maximilian II gave general approval only to be the object of the League. The King of France, Charles IX, declined to join it, but offered to interpose with friendly counsel between the Porte and the Republic. The Dukes of Savoy and Urbino and the Grand Duke of Tuscany promised their help. The Duke of Ferrara was only with difficulty persuaded not to side with the enemies of Venice. The Persian king refused to receive its ambassador. The Turks, meanwhile, hastened their preparations, though the Venetian ambassador was able to postpone the declaration of war until the return of Kubat Çavuş, who was dispatched to Venice to treat directly with the Senate. Their reply was a defiance, and hostilities commenced on the eastern shores of the Adriatic. At Corfu, the Venetians lost 20,000 men from the plague. The galleys of Venice, Spain, and the Church assembled at last at Candia. Those of the Porte, under the Hungarian Piale with Lala Mustafa and Ulujali, Turks, after an unsuccessful attack on the island of Tenos, embarked the troops mustered about Adalia and sailed for Cyprus. There were 150 galleys with lighters and the smaller craft. End of quote. And Diedo goes on to say what happened at Nicosia. It's an extensive account. I've spoken at length about it in the previous episodes, but also at the beginning of what I used to call the Cyprus series. So make sure to check those episodes as well. Diedo's account ends with what had happened at Nicosia and the fact that the Ottomans were marching towards Famagusta, the only town, as Diedo says, quote, remained faithful to the Venetians, end of quote. It's a very good account, almost as extensive as Paolo Paruta's, of which we will speak in the next episode. It's a very lengthy one, so I think I'll do it in a few parts. And soon we shall be done with this mini-series looking at accounts from Excerpta Cypria. In the meanwhile, thank you for tuning in, listening to this episode, and until the next time, all the best. Remember to subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really does help the channel. Thanks again.